Thank you, Lucas. Hi, everyone. Hi, Wright.
Hey.
I'm so glad to be here in this room with you and talking about this unbelievably spectacular, moving, beautiful book that has made me cry in many different pages.
I'm really sorry.
No, it's a good cry. And I just want to say, I think that anyone who talks about this book, and we in particular on the stage, should do so in honor of Emmett Till.
You know, it's important to remember that, I think about this a lot, that, when I first started doing this, there were, say, 12 people left alive who knew him, and now there are probably 8, and they've been dying in front of me, and, yes, he sparked the civil rights movement. Yes, there are many tectonic forces that led to his death, but he was also just a kid, and, he had just turned 14. He was that weird in-between age where, he loved comic books, but at his 14th birthday party, his mother had overheard him and his friends playing Spin the Bottle. So, he was kind of interested in maybe kissing a girl, but he still liked Spider-Man. And there is a storage unit in Chicago right now that the family every month pays the bill on because they don't know what to do with it. And in it is his toy train set. And I think it's important, we go far afield here, but you just cannot forget that if you're going to walk around with Emmett Till's name in your mouth, you better sort of come correct and have a sense of, like, he isn't a symbol. He's somebody's little baby.
Yeah, I think what this book helped me do, similar to the movie Till that came out a couple of years ago, was to allow me and other readers and other people coming to the story decades after it happened to know the person and to love the person and to extend that love back in time and to have it go forward, I hope.
One of the last things he did on Earth was they were driving home from Greenwood after a Saturday night, and they were going back out to his Uncle Moses Wright's house, and it's really dark in Mississippi. It's still, people aren't prepared for, how dark it is. And they hit a dog, and Emmett was begging them to stop the car and go check on the dog. And they were just like, this is not safe. We are not stopping this car with 6 under 18-year-old black kids in the Mississippi Delta on a Saturday night in 1955. We got to go home. And as they closed in on the house where he would be kidnapped, he sat in the back seat and softly cried to himself.
So what you were just saying about the train set is so interesting to me, because this is a story about many things. It's about America, it's about how we lived and how we will live together, and it's about memory and how memory is transmitted in inchoate ways, but also in very concrete ways. So the trains are an object, the gun is an object, and I thought we could begin tonight by talking about the gun. The gun, when you wrote this book, the gun that had been used to murder Emmett Till, its whereabouts were basically unknown. There was sort of information about where it was, but no one had seen it. Now we know, and you recently wrote about that, so I'm wondering if you could tell us the history of the gun.
In 1943, the Army couldn't make enough .45 caliber sidearms for officers, and so every gun manufacturer in America was getting asked to turn their production lines to those. And so Ithaca in New York, it's still called Gun Hill if anybody went to Cornell, but it's Ithaca started making 1911 .45 automatics, and they made a batch of them in 1943. One of them was sent and given to J.W. Milam when he was commissioned in France. And he brought that gun home with him, and he had it. And 10 years later, in 1955, he used it to pistol whip Emmett Till, and it was the gun that the FBI believes fired the fatal shot. I found it, and it was in a safety deposit box in a bank in Greenwood, Mississippi, and it had been handed down like some weird trophy from a father to a son, and this guy who's a crop duster pilot in Webb, Mississippi, had it. And just the fact that it was hidden was so menacing to me, as was the fact that, the FBI went and ran ballistics test on it, and it still fires. And now that gun has been put into, it's in a museum, the Civil Rights Museum in Jackson, Mississippi. I connected the crop duster pilot with the people of the museum, and so now it's on display. And it feels interesting because it feels, well, a couple of things to me. One, it feels like it's somehow been neutered of its menace because it is now part of history and you can try to interpret it and think about it. And then the other thing is, it is in a museum that owes its existence to the very liberal Mississippi Governor William Winter and the very conservative Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour. And at a time when I am grasping for something hopeful, the fact, it's also like through the looking glass if the state of Mississippi is suddenly at the forefront of like remembering civil rights. But it's hopeful that in this moment, when even the sort of Smithsonian are cowering, that the Mississippi Department of Archives and History is going out and finding these artifacts. But I went and saw it, and I'd never seen it before. I just had it described to me in the safety deposit box, and it's 45 is a really big caliber gun, and so I've never had one pointed at me, and what I wasn't prepared for is how big the hole is at the end of the barrel. And, they pointed that gun at my friend Wheeler Parker first, and then they pointed it at Emmett Till's face, and he was in bed with his cousin Simeon Wright. And the things Simeon talked about for the rest of his life, the two things he could never forget were, one, how they smelled like whiskey, and two, how long it took Emmett to get his socks and shoes on because he was so nervous and he couldn't get them on. And, so that the woman at the museum said she's seen a lot of artifacts. In that museum, they have the gun that was used to kill Medgar Evers, and she's used to like really, really tough artifacts. And she said this one has affected her like nothing else.
Yeah, I can understand that. When I had read that they were displaying the gun, to be honest with you, my first reaction was no.
Yeah.
Like, put that away. Put that deep in a cellar somewhere.
Well, it's interesting because that's the debate that was happening inside the Till family. Emmett's cousin, best friend, and the last living eyewitness to his murder is a Kojic minister from Chicago named Reverend Wheeler Parker. Kojic, if you don't know, it's the Church of God in Christ, and it's the Black Pentecostal, and he's a preacher. And his wife, Marvell McCain Parker, she is related to John McCain. She's one of the Black McCains because they all go back to the same slave owner, and there's a white McCain family and a Black McCain family, all from Teoc, Mississippi. And so Marvell is the same place in the family tree as Megan McCain, and Marvell's father is the same place in the family tree as John McCain, and they have joint white and Black family reunions. And so in Teoc. So when John McCain said he didn't know, was just lying. His brother goes to the went to the reunions. He was just lying. But it's really, she was like, this is macabre. I don't like this. And her husband, Reverend Parker, was like, no, I want people to see it. I don't want it out in the world. I want it in a museum. I want it where it starts to slip into the past. If there's just this gun out there that still fires, that was more menacing to him than it being on display. But like, for sure. And like the barn, there was a lot of internal debate about that. Like, how do you interpret a place that like, I've been out there a lot, and it's I don't like going out there.
Yeah, I can understand why. And just for people who haven't read the book yet, so they understand what the barn is where Emmett Till was murdered, and historically, it has not been a place of note. It's not been in the official story. It's not been in the stories that get told. And you yourself did not know of it until, I think, 2020, is that right?
It's in the pandemic. I mean, I was working on a story. I work for ESPN as my day job, and I was doing a story where I was doing the family trees of all the members of the Los Angeles Lakers, and it was sort of an idea of like how everybody fits together. And I'd done LeBron's and had gotten LeBron's family back to the plantation in Georgia where they came from, and I was doing Avery Bradley, who's, if you're an NBA head like I am, I love Avery Bradley. He's one of those guys who's on the court and he makes every team better. If you watch him with a basketball player, everybody's like, he always knows exactly where to be. And so Avery Bradley's family is from Mount Bio, Mississippi, which is very close, it turns out, to the barn. And one of the witnesses in the murder was a woman named Amanda Bradley. And I wondered if they were related. Spoiler, they're not. But in the process, someone said, have you ever been to the barn? And I was like, what barn? And so the thing that happened is that the killers, there were a bunch of people there that night. When the book was published, I could count 8. I found 2 more people since the book was published. One person who said he was there, and another person who said that her grandfather told her that he was there. So now we're up to 10, and only 2 people were tried. So when they got paid to give a confession to Look magazine, they had to write a fictional version of the story because they couldn't leave breadcrumbs to their unindicted co-conspirators. So the barn was completely written out of the history, and it just sat there. It's just a guy's barn. I mean, it has been forever. And you talk about, so much of this is about like omerta, like the things that go unsaid, silence. And the dentist who bought it, who grew up with an eye shot of it, had no idea what had happened there. His father grew up with an eye shot of it, and his father's the age where, he could have been around. And he buys this place, and after he buys it, his father tells him. So he knew the whole time.
Yeah, he's actually a fascinating character in the book, The Dentist. Jeff, what's his last name?
Jeff Andrews.
Yeah, Jeff Andrews. He's fascinating because and I think in this way, he's very human in a strange way. I guess not a strange way. We're all human, and it's good and it's normal. But my feelings, let's just say this, my feelings about Dentist Jeff, the owner of one of the most hideous sites in American history, were complex because he now knows what happened in the barn, and he's open about it. You came, you wanted to see it. He said, come on in. Here are my Christmas decorations that I store in the corner. Here's where the murder happened. And it seems like he's been very cooperative. That was my impression, at least from reading you, with people who want to commemorate Emmett Till and who want to see and who want to know. He's not trying to hide the barn.
No.
But at the same time, you write about his own history. He went to, maybe you can talk a little bit about the school he went to, whose board he's on. And my question at the end of that is, what do you make of someone like this dentist and his role in the story?
It's so funny. I mean, he genuinely doesn't understand what any of it has to do with him. And in some ways, he is... When I went to high school, in 8th grade, we studied American history. And my history teacher, Miss Holcomb, called the Civil War the War of Northern Aggression. Like, that was the right answer on the test. And the entire school system that has sprung up in Mississippi exists mainly so that you can be a dentist and not understand what any of this has to do with you. It's not an accident. And so, you have hang on, this is fun. This is from a textbook. Let me find this picture. This is from a textbook that's being taught right now in the Mississippi Delta. And I'm gonna read you everything that's in the book about Emmett Till. This is a Mississippi history book. This is gonna be a good party trick if I can find this quickly. Here we go. Painted a poor.
What are you searching to find it?
You can search the words because your iPhone, they're all spying on us. We're so screwed.
You're a level ahead.
Like the only thing that's saving me is my life is really boring and I don't have a secret family or anything. So you're welcome to read my emails. All right, this is it. This is the only thing in the textbook on Emmett Till. In 1955, J.P. Coleman, the Attorney General from Choctaw County, was elected governor in Mississippi's first general election after the Brown v. Board of Education decision. Coleman promised to keep the schools segregated. He proved to be a moderating force during a very difficult time. Oh, just wait. I heard the scoff, you have no idea. Just after the election, Emmett Till, a young black man from Chicago, allegedly made a pass at a white woman at a rural store. Two men kidnapped him, beat him, killed him, and threw his body in the Tallahatchie River. The coverage of the trial and acquittal of his accused murderers, who later admitted their guilt in an article in a national magazine, painted a poor picture of Mississippi and its white citizens.
Yeah, that's shocking.
And
It's shocking.
That's being taught right now. And so the reason that so many people and politicians in places like Mississippi are so worried about what they call critical race theory is that the way to understand the Deep South is the accusation is always the confession. And so they have been teaching critical race theory, even though that's not really what this is, but they have been teaching a very curated mythological version of the past for a very specific reason for a very long time, and they understand the power of that. There have been many books written about the textbook wars in Mississippi, and so they're nervous about somebody doing to them what they did to somebody.
Yeah, and it's, like many things in American life, in American history, in American politics, it's a war of facts, and it's a war of interpretation, and it's a war of memory.
It's a war of memory. I mean, it's the great Churchill thing, that like the Irish remember the defeats long after the British have forgotten the victories. And, the way that Mississippi is this weird fugue-like coexistence between reality and memory is hard to describe. So, the barn sits on the Drew to Ruleville Road. The Drew to Ruleville Road was built by a guy named Aaron Forrest. Aaron Forrest's brother was Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in addition to being the Confederate general. Nathan Bedford Forrest marched his cavalry down the Drew to Ruleville Road going from this way to this way in the winter of 1863 and 1864. He marched by a piece of land that in 1941 would be a Nazi prisoner of war camp. And so there were German prisoners out there picking cotton during the 40s. And that's the same road that J.W. Milam came the other way in his 1954 green and white two-tone Chevrolet pickup truck with terrified Emmett Till in the back. And so I think the way to talk about and think about Mississippi is that in some sort of very real way, those cavalry horses and that pickup truck passed each other night after night after night after night after night.
So how did you come to this history? Because you're a native son. You're from Mississippi. You grew up very close to the barn and to the place where all of this happened.
23 miles.
Yeah, and you write in the book about your own grandfather, who, let's say, my impression of him is that he was perhaps not the most progressive person in the country, let alone the state.
He was the founder of the Jackson, Mississippi Citizens Council, and if you don't know what that is, that's like the white-collar Klan. Like, they didn't burn a cross in their yard, they just cut off your credit, and got you fired from your job. And, my uncle, this is interesting. So my uncle came home from college. They're from Bentonia, Mississippi, which if you're a blues nut, that's where Skip James is from. It's a very specific kind of blues. It's a town of like 400 people. And so my uncle went out and made these field recordings of these old guys who worked on the farms around town who were playing this old and dying blues. And then when his father found out he had been recording this music that was made by black people, this is my grandfather, he burned them. And that same uncle is the only person who's upset with me about the book now. He learned his lesson. The lesson was taught.
That's so interesting. Wow. So, Wright, how did you first encounter the story of Emmett Till? Because I know you didn't hear it in your high school.
I was in a Southern history class at the University of Missouri, and it's so interesting. I had no idea, but one of the things that I find doing the book is that it's such a famous thing, but even so much of it, even with all of that knowledge, remains unknown. And so it was such an interesting mix of like coming to something that I didn't know that I thought everyone knew. And then once you get through there are a lot of books written about Emmett Till that are like, have a lot of deeply factual errors. And so like there are a couple of very famous books, I'm not gonna name names, but if you go through the endnotes, you'll see that they're not quoted because we just decided they weren't reliable. And so it's a weird thing where you learn about it, and then the more you learn about it, the more you realize that tons about this remains unknown. I mean, that quote has become a cliche about the past not being the past, but that's very real.
Yeah, especially because, the deeper you get into your book and the more you feel you come to know, I think, about the story and about the deeper story, because your book is about the history, not just of one murder, but of a place, and the place that led to this crime. You're getting so granular with the facts you're giving us. I mean, I can just see you like swimming in an archive. So at one point you were talking about the railroad spikes from the old railroad that ran through this part of the Delta being torn up to go towards the war effort. And I was like, oh man, he's given us the number of ships that the iron went into. Like, Wright went deep on this. But still, you get, and good for you, because it's inspirational. But you get deeper into the book and you realize how much has been destroyed around this case. You realize that in the courts, the files sit empty. You realize that the transcript of this trial doesn't exist anymore. So how do you go about putting it back together again, reconstructing, which is, I think I'm stumbling on this word because it's a bit on the nose in this context, but still.
I mean, there's a lot of digging in basements. There's a lot of, the land records in Sunflower County stop at 1900, and then somebody told me like, hey, that's not the real set. The city attorney across the street has the actual set that goes all the way back. And you realize that there are two versions. There's the one that's constructed. It's like I talked to Robert Paxton one time, who's the expert on Vichy France, and he told me that lots of French military officers had two diaries that they kept, one in which they were for Germany and one in which they were for England, because they weren't sure which one they were going to need to have. And so like Mississippi is a lot like that. And so, so much is gone, and yet that gun remains, and yet that barn remains. Like, let me tell you, there's a guy named Willie Reed, and Willie Reed was an 18-year-old in 1955, and he woke up that morning to go get some, he said he was going to get stuff to cook for breakfast. I think he was going to buy cigarettes, and then when it got to be real public news, he tried to come up with a better story. But he was cutting through the Milam farm, and he saw the pickup truck turn in, and he hid behind a well and he listened to the murder, and then he went home and went to work, and then a couple of days later he sees Emmett Till's picture in a newspaper, and he's like, oh my God, that's the kid I saw. And he realizes that he has a choice, and what did it is he looked at that picture of Emmett Till and said, God, that could be me. With everyone in his family telling him, don't say anything. He lived with his grandfather, Ad Reed, and Ad Reed was like, don't say anything. He went on his own to go testify. And, he and Moses Wright in 1955 were the first two black people in the history of the state of Mississippi to ever point their finger at a white person and accuse them of murder. It was the first time that had ever happened. And he lasted about 2 days after the trial and then had to leave. He had so many death threats that they arranged, they were going to sneak him out of Mississippi. And he, with the clothes on his back, walked out of his house. He took a right on the Louisville Road, the same way Nathan Bedford Forrest horses went. And he walked 6 miles down to Highway 8, and there was a Oldsmobile 88 sitting there waiting on him with the engine running with a big block V8. And the guy driving the car was Medgar Evers. And he drove him to the Memphis airport and put him on a plane. And they flew him to Chicago. And, there's the National Guards in the news a lot right now. The Mississippi National Guard got an officer and a state trooper and put them on a military airplane, and they flew them to Chicago to go find Willie Reed to scare him. Just to let him know, you might be in Chicago, but the state of Mississippi has a long arm. He had a nervous breakdown. He changed his name. He worked at the Jackson Park Hospital on the south side of Chicago, if anybody's from Chicago. He was a surgical orderly. He met a nurse named Juliet. They dated for 6 or 7 years. They were married for 10 years before she found out that he had had another name and they'd been a witness in a murder trial. Every time it got really cold in Chicago, his grandfather, who also had to flee the state, would say, "I told you not to say anything." And he lived the rest of his life, and then in 2003, his phone rings, and it's the FBI. And they're going to reopen the case. And they say, "We're going to need you to come back down to Mississippi and walk us through your testimony." And he's like, "I'm absolutely not doing that." And the FBI agent is a guy named Dale Killinger, 75th Ranger Battalion, combat jumps. He said, "I give you my word, nothing will happen to you. They have to kill me first." And he went down there, and the thing that gets me is Willie Lewis goes back down there, and the South it wasn't urban, but it was really populated. You needed a family every 25 acres. So there were houses everywhere. There were country stores everywhere. There were juke joints everywhere. And all of that's gone because everything's mechanized. And so they tore all those houses down. They plant right up to the road now. And so Willie Lewis goes back. Every person he'd ever known is gone. Every home he'd ever seen was gone. Every single thing he had ever known in the life that he was forced to leave behind was gone, and that barn was still there. And the FBI agent, who's worked, all sorts of terrible crimes, the FBI agent said it's the most emotional thing he's ever seen because he watched as this old man, Willie Lewis, turned back into Willie Reed, and he sort of lost his balance. Like just the weight of the land and the dirt and the blood in the dirt laid him low. And he went back home. He had nightmares. He would cry in his sleep. And last weekend, 2 weekends ago, I flew to Chicago. I went and picked up Juliette Lewis at her house in Inglewood. And she and I got on the train, and we went to Mississippi, and I took her to the barn for a ceremony. And she'd never been there. And she's selling the house that she and Willie lived in. It closes on September 17th, and she's moving to Ashtabula, Ohio, to live with her son. And she wanted to go say goodbye to Willie. And I took her to where his house was, and I made the walk with him, and I introduced him to Medgar Evers' daughter. And I just was so struck. I mean, this is a really long answer to your question. I apologize, but I was so struck by how close it was. It was Medgar Evers' daughter and Willie Reed's widow. And Medgar Evers drove Willie Reed to freedom. And, and we'll get into, Medgar Evers and political violence, but I mean, it's so close. It happened yesterday.
It makes me it makes me think of justice. Justice was not served in this case. We all know that. And one of the enormous frustrations of it, I think, is that there were multiple attempts. Justice was not going to be served in 1955 in Mississippi. We know that. Mamie Till knew that. She left the courthouse before the verdict came down, and she said, "I don't need to be here to hear that, to see that. I know what it's going to be." But as you say, the FBI went back into this case. There clearly was a shred of hope that the truth could not only be known, but could be acknowledged and that something could be acted on. And that didn't happen either. So is a form of justice that Juliette Lewis walking with Medgar Evers' daughter? Is it the barn continuing to exist but being turned into a memorial site so that people can go there and remember Emmett Till? Is it white people and black people remembering together and talking together about this and being there together? What do you think it looks like?
You know, the FBI asked Reverend Wheeler Parker that exact question the last time they were going to open the case. They literally said, "What does justice look like to you?" Because the only person who can convict Carolyn Bryant is Carolyn Bryant, and she's not going to testify against herself.
And Carolyn Bryant is the white woman,
the white woman
at
that
the
he whistled
center
at,
of all of this.
that he whistled at. And so, what Reverend Parker said was, justice is memory. Justice is not forgetting. You know, I stood on the banks of the Tallahatchie River, right where they found his body, with Sharon Wright, whose uncle was Moses Wright, who was Emmett's uncle, who never got over it. He had to leave his cotton crop in the field and move to Chicago. I mean, he was a country boy his whole life, liked to hunt and fish, liked to farm, had a smokehouse, liked to make his own sausage, and he had to leave. He had to give his dogs away, and he goes to Chicago where he doesn't know anyone and he's out of place, and he takes a job cleaning a theater, and he goes to work every night at the exact time that the kidnappers knocked on his door. And he was sort of shunned because Emmett was related to him by marriage, and everyone else in the house that night was related to him by blood. And there was this feeling that you wouldn't have let him take one of yours. And so he was shunned his whole life. And so I was standing next to Sharon, and I said, "What are you thinking about?" And she's like, "I'm just so grateful." I'm like, "What?" And the Tallahatchie River is black people in the Mississippi Delta call the Tallahatchie River the singing river because there have been so many bodies thrown in it. And what she said was, he got out of the river. And so that's what justice looks like. And to connect those two things, I mean, I think there's a ongoing attempt right now. I mean, there's clearly a war on black history, and what they're trying to do is throw Emmett Till back in the river.
Yeah, the difference between the environment into which you publish this book, the hardback, let's say, and the one in which the paperback is now coming out is profound. It's extraordinary.
I wish I were smart enough to have done this on purpose, but I've been going around talking about this everywhere, and in Mississippi a lot. And I mean, it's very clear now that the Make America Great Again project really at its core is an attempt to unwind the entire civil rights movement. You know, and everybody talks about the civil rights movement beginning with the murder of Emmett Till. So really what is going on is an attempt to take us back to August 27th, 1955. I mean, there's actually a date on it if you sort of get in there. And the book is a history of how that world was formed, and so like there's this like crystal ball thing, and so it's been really interesting to see people read it to sort of see where we might be going, and yet also it's a playbook because there are people here from Reverend Parker to Medgar Evers that fought against that and changed it, and so both the seeds of our own destruction and the path to redemption exist in the story of Emmett Till, not in my story. I mean, it's his story. I mean, it's. I want to make that clear. Like, there's a reason that, the barn is the place of death, and Robert's Temple in Chicago is a place of resurrection, and and those things are very connected, as are the Mississippi Delta and Chicago.
Yeah, I was very struck reading this book as a Northerner who grew up just across the park from here. I think something very endemic to the Northern mindset is we have nothing to do with that. Like, thank goodness we're absolved by history that we're up here. This wasn't we were on the right side of that. And I think part of what needs to be done on a moral level as anyone develops is to realize the interconnectedness of absolutely everything. Were you surprised as you researched this book about how many places were connected to the Delta?
I was stunned, honestly, and I've grown there. I lived there my whole life. When you get into the land records. You know, I think like in Mississippi, people lie, but the land doesn't, because people value the land more than they value the people. And the global river of capital flowed through Mississippi. I mean, in many ways, Mississippi was a colony of Manchester, Liverpool, London, and New York City. I mean, it was, you know, the huge plantation that where directly next to the barn was owned by New York timber barons, and Teddy Roosevelt would go stay there and hunt. He gave to the plantation owner, they'd go down and like cosplay Southern and then come back up here. And so we went down there to visit and brought them 2 ginkgo trees, and they planted them, and one of them died, but one of them's still there, and it's behind a trailer. It has a tire swing in it, and they don't know what it is, and it's Teddy Roosevelt's ginkgo tree. I told them. They're like, what? God damn, Bo. And there were some real mean. There were some real mean dogs in that yard too. I was like, let me get out of here. And so so like, I mean, the largest plantation in the Mississippi Delta during this moment was owned by the Manchester Fine Doublers and Spinners Association, which was the world's largest manufacturing conglomerate. That company still exists. They make all the lingerie for Marks and Spencer and Victoria's Secret. And Delta Pine Land Plantation still exists, and it's now owned by Bayer, the aspirin people. And so, you know, before 1933, when nylon was invented in the DuPont laboratories, cotton was the most important commodity in the world. Cotton was oil, and Mississippi was Saudi Arabia. And, you know, and so it's like very important when understanding Mississippi. If you drive through there now, if it looks like a failed experiment, because it was. You know, lots of people got their 10% out of Mississippi and then moved the capital when it could no longer hit those margins, and then left Mississippi with a caste system that had been built to maximize that capital, and just left everybody in the wreckage. I mean, one of the things that's crazy is after the Civil War, as a side note, I love this because all of the Southern politicians are very much like Southern politicians now. They just were given crazy speeches, and they're like the dog that caught the car. And so the most important thing in predicting the price of cotton is called a carryover, and that's how many bales are sitting in warehouses, not yet in a manufacturing plant or a textile mill. And so the whole idea of the Civil War was we have control of the world's greatest commodity. We have all the oil. They won't. Europe will make the United States settle with us. But not a single person involved in any of this planning thought to check the carryover. And the 1959 and 1960 cotton crops were the biggest cotton crops that had ever been grown, and it was the highest 2 carryovers in history up until that point, and not a single textile mill or factory in the world needed a single bale of cotton until November of 1863 at the earliest, and at that point it was already done. And so they started an entire war and killed all of these boys on both sides, wrecked the country. We're still fighting that war right now, and they did it because no one bothered to stop and do the math. And so the thing about the Delta is that this was, you know, you watch after the Civil War is sharecropping's invented, because everybody just wanted to go, white and black, they just wanted to go live on their 40 acres with their family and be like Jefferson's ideal of a yeoman farmer, and the global capital markets wouldn't let it happen. There are minutes of meetings in like Brussels and London where they sit around and they literally invent sharecropping. Like, how can we coerce this land to stay in huge factory-sized blocks instead of being broken up into 40-acre subsistence farms? I mean, none of this was an accident. This was all planned and then done to people. And then, you know, the price of cotton collapsed for good in 1923. In 1919, the price of cotton was $1 a pound. And today, it is, I'll tell you, today the price of cotton is 66 cents a pound. And it's because we can make clothes out of gasoline, out of oil now with petroleum. And so the price collapsed in 1923, and that was it. Can I see the book real quick? I don't ever do this, but like there's a, if you like want to understand Mississippi and like the lost cause, nostalgia, and everything you're seeing in the news, this is the thing, this blew my mind. I didn't know this. It's really wild. See how good I am at finding. Here we go, got it. So, and this is, there's nothing worse at a book event than when somebody reads a book. So like,
I disagree.
Oh, I hate it. Like, you guys, at least those look like comfortable chairs. Because like if you're sitting like one of those folding wooden chairs at a bookstore and somebody starts reading their precious words, I just like, you gotta just kill me now. Like, so I say this being self-aware enough to know that like this is a little obnoxious, but bear with me because it's going somewhere. The Great Mississippi, so by the way, it's important to know that the Mississippi Delta wasn't really settled until about 1900. On the edges it was, but like Paul Simon had it totally wrong. It is not the highway through the cradle of the Civil War. So the global cotton industry kept moving, kind of like oil does. It's in the Middle East, it's in the North Sea, it's offshore Louisiana. And so it kept moving wherever the margins and the yields were good. So it hit Mississippi once, Vicksburg, Natchez, Greenville, Greenwood, before the Civil War, moved to Egypt, moved to India, moved to Pakistan, moved to Brazil, and then moved back to Mississippi one more time before it died for good. So I'm talking about that second boom. The Great Mississippi Delta cotton boom lasted 20 years. The suffering and killing and decay that would follow for the next century were the price of 3 great years and a dozen good ones. These 2 decades also marked the peak of the lost cause mythology. Consider when all those Confederate statues went up around the state, and consider the history of cotton in the Delta. The land clearing finished around 1900. The price of cotton collapsed for good in 1923. And what happened in between? Port Gibson and Aberdeen raised statues in 1900. Macon in 1901. Fayette in 1904. Carrollton and Beulah and Okolona in 1905. Tupelo and Ole Miss in 1906. Brandon and Oxford and West Point in 1907, Cleveland and Lexington and Raymond and Duck Hill in 1908, Greenville and Winona in 1909, Hattiesburg twice for some reason, and Grenada in 1910, Gulfport and Kosciuszko and Quitman and Ripley and Brooksville and Heidelberg in 1911, Columbus and Laurel and Meridian and Philadelphia and Vaden in 1912, Greenwood and Sumner in 1913, Greenwood again in 1915, Hazelhurst in 1917, Louisville in 1921. Many of these were planted quite intentionally on the lawns of the local courthouses. Most of the monuments around the state were built during this brief but emotionally powerful cotton boom. Not a single courthouse statue in the state of Mississippi was erected after 1923. This has always been about cotton and money. And we are still, the worst place in the world to be is at the bottom of a commodity chain, even if you have power in that. And so, Mississippi has been it was a ward of Manchester, Liverpool, and London. My mother, who's in the crowd tonight, her father got the Manchester Guardian delivered to their house in Shelby, Mississippi, because it would help you understand, the interconnectedness of these worlds. And so Mississippi went from being a colony of global capital markets and Manchester manufacturers to being a ward of the United States government. And Mississippi, to my mind, has never, in its entire history since its founding in 1818, been governed for the benefit of its citizens. And if Mississippi didn't have such a terrible history of racial violence, Mississippi would be known as the most corrupt place in the world. And in the Panic of 1837, Mississippi defaulted on all of its loans. Everyone in the South did, and then every other state in the South paid them back. And Mississippi refused to, and the politicians played culture wars, and they came up with all sorts of reasons why Jesus didn't want them to pay this money back, and really they just didn't want to pay the money back. And 1933, by the way, Monaco was still suing the state of Mississippi, trying to get its money back. And so after the Civil War, if you want to know why Alabama's booming and Mississippi is not, it's because Alabama could go get bonds because it had a good credit rating and they could build factories, and Mississippi had no credit. And so Mississippi is incredibly poor today, and one of the real reasons is because its idiot politicians in 1837 wouldn't pay their bills. The past isn't dead, it isn't even past.
So how have people in Mississippi reacted to this book? You know, I think obviously this is a story, as we've been saying, that's been told many times, but as you point out, and I know we'll keep pointing out and should keep pointing out, it has never been fully told, and there's much left to tell, but I think it probably, I'm gonna conjecture that it hits different in Mississippi when a white Mississippian tells the tale and wants to look it squarely in the face.
You know, other than my uncle, Columbus, Mississippi is doing it as a community read. I mean, I've been talking about it all over the state. I think people realize that, one, that it's true and they know it in their bones, but two, Mississippi, again, it's the Heritage Foundation sets up shop in Mississippi. Everything they're gonna trot out for the rest of the country, they beta test on us. I mean, really. And so, all that stuff starts with us. And, Mississippi is still a ward of some other ideology. And when I look out into my crowds, I see white people, I see black people, I see young people, I see old people, I see people who clearly just got off a tractor, I see people in Hermes ties, and I can see who nods at what in the crowd. And the thing in Mississippi that I find is that people are desperate for there to be some unified tribe of us so that the state of Mississippi claims and celebrates Muddy Waters and Elvis Presley, so that the state of Mississippi claims and celebrates William Faulkner and Kiese Layman, so the state of Mississippi celebrates and claims Eudora Welty and Jesmond Ward. And I find that the actual people in Mississippi bear very little resemblance to our idiot leaders.
I think the people in New York City could say the same.
Dude, seriously.
We feel you, man. This is bad.
Where do they find these people? Here's my question. Don't answer it, but let's think about this. Do you think that politics self-selects for people who are so broken and empty inside, or do you think that they start off well-intentioned and you dance with the devil, you don't change him, he changes you? I don't know the answer to that, but I think about it all the time.
Yeah, and I think, I wish more people who went into politics would. I think we're about to have a very interesting example here of the second kind, and we'll see how he does.
Can we just randomly pick 435 people from the phone book and send them up there?
This is actually a great idea.
No, really, just teachers and dock workers and lawyers and a stay-at-home mom, and just randomly pick people. You can't make any money. Your job is held for you. You get paid a salary. You don't have to pay taxes again for the rest of your life or something, and you just go up there and do it.
I say we try it because it can't get worse.
It cannot get worse.
It cannot get worse. I just want to point out, first of all, I want to thank everyone who's sitting out there for your questions. This is the number of questions, a fair share, that was about the Mississippi reaction. People are very curious.
By the way, I was very curious.
Yeah, I bet. Were you scared a little bit?
I love the Texas singer-songwriter Robert Earl Keen, and he sings a song. I know that it was written by Ray Wiley Hubbard, in case anybody out there is a know-it-all. But I think it's a Robert Earl Keen song. And he says, I may not wear a Stetson, but I'm willing to bet, son, that I'm as big a Texan as you are. And so I kind of don't give a shit.
That's beautiful. Here's another Mississippi question. What do you like about living in Mississippi? And there's a PS. The PS is disclaimer. I was raised in Biloxi, the quote-unquote liberal part of the state.
Yeah. North Louisiana. I love Mississippi. I love that my family is buried in the dirt and that I'll be buried in the dirt. I love that line from the Episcopal liturgy that, we do this in remembrance of you. I love the way the defoliant smells in the fall when they're spraying the cotton plants, and it's always the smell of fall. I love the way the sun looks when it's coming up over the levee. I love to take my girls out on the Mississippi River and run it up on a sandbar and let them swim around in the shallows and dig around for little bugs and minnows and crawfish. I love the old line Mississippi Delta steakhouses. I love going to my mom's house and taking my kids there. I love thinking about the juke joints I went to in high school when these incredible blues musicians were playing, and I was an idiot, and I was like, I wish they'd stop playing guitar so I could talk to girls, and I'm like, that was really dumb. I love the way that music always takes me home when I hear it somewhere. I love what Merle Evers Williams said, yes, Mississippi was, but Mississippi is.
That's really beautiful, and it makes me think of something from the book, something that was said about Emmett Till, who, of course, grew up in Chicago. His mother and her people were from Mississippi, and it was said after he was dead, and you can remind me who said it, but it was someone who was raised with love wasn't going to understand that kind of hate.
And the thing you have to realize about Argo Summit, Illinois is a suburb of Chicago. They call it Little Mississippi. It's where the Argo starch plant is. They make Argo cornstarch. They make Cairo syrup, if you've ever made a really good pecan pie. And everybody there was from Mississippi. And when you go there now, Emmett Till's family, we grow sweet corn on our farm in the Delta. And his family always wanted me to bring up sweet corn to Chicago. They get hickory wood from the Delta to put in their smoker. They've tried to plant magnolia trees in their yard. These are not expats. These are not just Americans who moved. These are people who lived in Chicago for 60 and 70 years who, in a very real way, think of themselves as exiled Mississippians, and they miss home. And the reason I think the family trusted me is, on a certain level, we both loved the same things and could talk about it and had way more in common with each other than I would have probably with many of you. And I think we were both surprised. It was a careful dance, but I think it was rooted in that love of this place, and that even 60 and 70 years later, they live in Chicago, but Mississippi is home.
Yeah. This question is, did you have any books in mind as models as you wrote? And I know you did, and I want to just say before you answer, for people who haven't yet read the book, one thing that's so extraordinary about this book that makes it dizzying to first read, and then you learn how to read it, and you're like, yeah, I'm rolling, this is cool, I got it, is that it jumps between people, between time, between incidents in your life, incidents in the lives of people you've never met. It's truly a book in which the past is not past, and the future can talk to the past.
First of all, again, let me preface this by saying I understand it's like some indie musician saying, I really, really like Pet Sounds. So,
which is legit.
Just Led Zeppelin 4. I really wanted to make Led Zeppelin 4. So, but I can't believe I'm saying this out loud. I really wanted to write Absalom that was true.
Shoot for the moon. Jesus. Even if you miss, you'll land among the stars.
So my mom said, study for 100 so then you can make a 94.
What are we supposed to do in this life? We're supposed to not try to write Absalom, but make it true? What are we supposed to do? We're supposed to temper our ambitions?
And then the other two books that were very, very important, because the book is a deep history of the 36 square miles of land around the barn where Emmett Till was killed. It's Township 22 North, Range 4 West, measured from the Choctaw Meridian. And so two books that were really important to me were Will Campbell's Providence, which is a history of one place in Mississippi, and then William Least Heat Moon's Prairie Earth, which is the story of one county in Kansas. But most books either go deep or wide, and I wanted to do both, and so that was the game.
I'm going to do one last question because we're almost at time for signing, and you got to meet your public, who right now, I know you're out there, but I just see a blue light shining. It's very cozy and safe feeling, but
It really is. Like, you do totally forget that there are people
I know.
out
I'm
there.
like,
And that's really dangerous because, like, I
you
used
might
to have
say anything.
I used to have a radio show in Kansas City that had a theme song, and one of the lines was, "We'd like to have him on every day because he don't care what he say." So, like, I'm capable of some outlandish. So anyway, I wish I could see you. It would make this more real.
Well, this person has asked a really relevant question, and I'll get to it in a second, but it's a question that's much on my mind and I think is at the heart of this book. So let me just preface it for a second with some of the things that your book makes me think about too. We're in a bad way in this country. We're in a bad way everywhere in this country, and I think one thing that we realize now, I was talking before about the myth of the North a little bit, which is that we're not connected to all that we can escape. We have our own problems, but we can escape all that. And I think one thing that we've learned, and we're continuing to learn all the time, is that we all are connected. And we're quite connected, in fact, in a way that's inescapable. We're in a time of intense violence, political violence, as we saw horrifically today. And we're in a time of the erasure of history. It has always, you were talking about MAGA before, it's always struck me as blood-chilling that the 1950s would be seen as an idyllic era. And here we're talking about something that happened right smack in the middle of the 1950s, 1955, the nadir in many ways of what this country is. And yet, when I think about your book and what the main thing that I got from your book, to me it really is about how necessary it is and how difficult it is to transform guilt into responsibility, and to take these feelings of shame, which are pervasive in American life, and which, fascinatingly, the killers seem to have felt. They were haunted, and they died broken men.
Mamie Till got asked one time how she felt about the fact that they got away with murder, and she said, "What are you talking about? They got the death penalty. They died alone, they died shunned, and they all were eaten up with cancer before they were 60.
Yeah, it's in many ways their story is a cautionary tale for anyone who would think that taking violence into their own hands and acting from hate might get them somewhere better in this life. The question here is, what do you think of the Till legacy today? And I think we all want to know that. What do we do how do we turn shame and horror into responsibility? And do you have any answers after thinking about this for so long?
I think two things. I think that one, people don't know this, but every time a Trayvon Martin gets killed or a George Floyd gets killed, or, oh my God, the guy from Fruitvale Station, but like Oscar, people don't see it, but that family gets a phone call from Emmett Till's family, quietly behind the scenes, and they just say, "This is our number. You're going to want to talk to us later. We know what the rest of your lives are going to be like." And so they are very involved in the personal lives of the people this happened to, because it happened to a nation, sure, but it happened to a race of people, sure, but it also happened to a family, and in many ways it's still happening to a family, and that's one of the ways they process it. The other thing is, and I guess this is, especially given the news of today, a place to end. In Mississippi, there's a deep, deep history of political rhetoric and violence. That governor's campaign that I referenced in the thing I read from the textbook, these people, this was a race to the bottom. They were all trying to prove they were more in favor of segregation than the other people. You should get on newspapers.com and go read the campaign coverage from the 1955 governor's race. It's bananas. I mean, they are saying unbelievable stuff. A lot of talk about bayonets, a lot of Civil War metaphor, a lot of talk about violence. That election culminated on a Tuesday, and less than 24 hours later is when Emmett Till went to the store and whistled. John F. Kennedy gave his famous civil rights speech, and less than 24 hours later, Medgar Evers was shot. I mean, ideas are never the enemy, violence is the enemy. And like, that's the legacy, whether it's in 1968, whether it's in 2025, whether it's they're shooting Medgar Evers, who you agree with, whether they're shooting Charlie Kirk, who you don't. Charlie Kirk had a 4-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son who his widow is going to have to explain to them tonight that daddy's not coming home. And the legacy of Emmett Till, if there will be a legacy, is that we have to be better than that, or we won't have a country. There's only an us. If there's an us and a them, there's nothing. And I think that's the legacy.
Thank you, Wright, and thank you, everybody.